Business Excellence and Innovation, der Podcast zu Vertriebs- und Innovationsthemen mit Jörg und Patrick aus der Sendeanstalt Beromünster.
Good morning, Benoit. How are you?
Good morning, Jörg. I'm so happy to be with you this morning.
Yeah, thank you so much. When looking at each other, we both seem a little bit tired and coughing still. So it's tough times. So I'm very happy we could make it. And I tell everyone, I'm so glad you have some time because everyone is super busy and we really appreciate your support for our podcast. But before we start, maybe you give a short introduction. Who are you? What have you done? What are you doing? Just that our listeners get a little bit of an idea.
All right. My name is Benoit Rengade. As you can hear from my accent, I'm French. Mm-hmm. So next time I can do that in German, but let's train a bit before.
Okay.
I'm 55.
Mm-hmm.
I used to work for a quarter of century with Michelin when I mostly was in sales functions. Mm-hmm. And at the end of my time there, I was in charge of setting up and leading the customer experience initiative for the group.
Cool. Very nice.
It started back in 2016, and I eventually left Michelin about 1 year ago to set up my own consultancy.
Very nice, very nice. So you have a broad experience, and this is also how we met in this customer experience group. That was a very nice time. Also came to Clermont-Ferrand when all those people from Deutsche Telekom, Allianz, and you from Michelin and others were meeting and discussing the latest developments in customer experience management. I found it very valuable and was a really great, let's say, experience also from my side. And we always ask our participants to bring two things also apart from their knowledge and experience. For sure, that's the most valuable thing. But I always ask a wine recommendation and a book. Let's start always with the wine.
All right. I start with the wine because I'm French. Okay,
for sure.
I thought it was a drink. I'm not sure why you want it to be a wine with me, but anyway.
Okay.
I would choose a wine from the Rhône Valley because I used to live in my youth in Lyon area, and I choose one from the northern part of the Rhône Valley that is called Hermitage. Hermitage in French. Yeah. And more specifically, the one I used to drink, which is Domaine de Remisière, which I strongly advise because it's good value for money. And when we next meet, I will bring a bottle.
Oh, that sounds very nice. And taste-wise, it's a bit bolder. It's a little bit more, let's say, edgy, or when you describe the taste?
It's fruity, it's full-bodied, it's 100% Shiraz.
Oh, okay.
So it's a deep, dark wine,
nice.
The kind of which I like very much.
I think we have the same taste. So that sounds very, very, very nice. Looking forward to try. And then we say, okay, we need not only something for the heart, we also need something for the book, for the brain. So what's your book recommendation?
I would recommend Fred Reichel's latest book called Winning for Purpose, because I think it's very inspirational. You might know Fred as one of the founding fathers of NPS, so he's very important for customer experience. He's getting old, and this book is more like philosophy rather than what to develop.
Okay.
And I feel like it's his legacy to the world once he is not here anymore. That's what he wants to leave.
Okay.
And his motto is not about customer satisfaction. It's about enriching the lives of customers.
Very nice. So I also read some of his latest books and articles. He's also, let's say, moving away a little bit from NPS, more towards customer value, or like you said, enriching, more holistic understanding. And also the consulting company Bain, who are working with him or based on his research and findings. Also there you can see a little bit of a shift from a, let's say, pure NPS focus, which they had in the past, more to, like you said, you could say philosophical, but also, let's say, more holistic kind of view towards the customer, which I like very much. Because sometimes this pure NPS has also some limitations in which I encountered over the last, let's say, 15 years. Great.
I can make a comment about what you just said because I'm not a big fan of measuring things. When you speak about NPS, you feel like you've got a KPI, and our world is very fond of having ratios and numbers for everything we do. But when it comes about people's interactions, relationships, and things like this, you cannot measure everything. What you measure is only the tip of the iceberg. It indicates something. It might be good for knowing what to do next. However, it's not the full reality. As I used to say, an indicator indicates things. It is not the stuff.
Exactly.
So when we started the practice at Michelin in 2016, my team and myself gathered, and we told ourselves, the first one that says that the objective for next year is to increase NPS by 3 points will be fired.
Okay.
Because that's not what we want to do.
No.
What we want to do is improving customer experience. Eventually, this will translate or not into a better NPS, but that's not so much the point.
I have it also when I start, because most companies I worked with the last years, they were not so customer centric. So I introduce most of the time the NPS. And the first question, apart from how it's going up or how can we increase the NPS, is, do you have a benchmark with other companies, how we are? And I'm like, but that's not the aim or the intention of NPS, that you do benchmarks and then you tell all the organization, hey, listen, we are 5 points higher than our competitors. So actually we don't need to do things. This is not the aim of NPS. So this is, yeah.
You're very right.
Yeah, striking. But now we jumped in a very concrete example, but just from a starting point in this podcast, what's your understanding from customer experience management, and also what's the purpose in an organization, or let's say where does customer experience help, or where's the impact for an organization?
Okay. There are two questions in what you said. The first one is what is customer management for an organization? And the second one is about the impact. And the first one, I would say, the job of the CXO is to orchestrate everything from top to bottom within the company to make sure the company is getting more focused on their customer and improve their lives of the customers, as Fred would have put it. And that's not so easy. You need to have a listening capability, but you also need to have a strong problem-solving process. And you need to have the buy-in from the top of the company. And eventually, this will even drive the change in behaviors for everyone, not just the front line. One of the big mistakes is to focus on customer service or salespeople, but eventually management, manufacturing, research and development, every aspect of the company, I would say supply chain, which is the usual suspect as well, are very much part of this. And you have to take a lot of initiatives and find inspiration, because the thing is, everything is getting out of fashion within 2-3 years. So you have to find new stuff all the time to let people think, yeah, that's the right thing to do.
Okay.
And they need to have some fun in this.
Understood. A very interesting point of view that you're having is, like you said, orchestration, because when I look at LinkedIn, people focus very much not on the orchestration, more on the experience. So actually what they do, they take out, let's say, the 3, 4, 5 most important touch points and try to enlighten or wow customers at those touch points. And this for me was always a little bit confusing, because like I said, I was also more on the orchestrating side of the whole organization rather than having delighted touch points.
If you delight on one touch point, but you're desperate on the next one, at the end of the day, what do you think? If you go to a nice restaurant, the food is fantastic, but the service is awful, and the bill is wrong. Well, when you leave, you have a mixed feeling at best. So you need to improve the whole experience. And for this, you need to have an eye on everything that has a value for the customer. And don't have... Another mistake is to think from your point of view, from the company's point of view. And the company is always a bit selfish. They will think about reducing costs and improving their own process, sometimes at the cost of the customer experience. And the key point is to start exactly the opposite. Start from the customer experience and work backward to the processes and how you want things to happen for the customer. At the end of the day, it doesn't cost more. On the contrary, if you have better customers, happier customers, it goes without saying, I would say, they tend to buy more, they tend to stay longer, they tend to tell others, and they tend to make less claims, less complaints. And so the cost of service is going to be reduced.
And that's, I think, tackles a little bit my second question. What's the impact, or also from your experience? Because what I see in Swiss banks, they hire 2 people It's like a communication department. They sit somewhere in the organization. Like I said, they focus on 2 initiatives or lighthouse projects. And then they say, so this is customer experience management from my point of view, which has, given the nature where they are set up in the organization and the things they have to decide, can only have a very limited impact if you look at the financials. But when it comes to your point of view, like orchestrating, and you have spent some years with Michelin, you have also a lot of colleagues that are also, let's say, fighting for better customer experiences. If I want to ask you, so you mentioned now a few examples like recommendation, all that stuff, but when it comes down, where do you see the best or the strongest impact on the financials of an organization?
Okay. This is a tricky question because of my own experience.
Yeah.
If you're working with a subscription business or with direct customers, and you've got the knowledge of your end customers, it's pretty easy, or it requires some data management, but it's not so complex to know what are the new customers, how many you left, how much they buy more, etc. But in the Michelin business, you are selling to dealers, and dealers will sell to the end user that we don't know.
Okay.
So I never had to run a ROI for the customer experience initiative.
Okay.
Not directly. However, I was blessed enough to have a CFO that did not question. When I came to him and say, I need to try to see how I can run the ROI for the initiative, he told me, no, we don't need that because we just believe it's the right thing to do.
Okay.
So, however, if you look at, not at a global business, but at specific customers' point of view, if you take one key account and you look at what you've done with this key account, eventually you can measure what business you did more just because of customer experience with him, and what is the increased share of business you have with this customer. And this translates quickly into millions.
I see. And you mentioned now another thing is like, and I think everybody that is working in the area or field of customer experience management is the buy-in of top management. From your point of view, and in Michelin, how was it? Was it a fight, or how do you experience also when you talk with colleagues? Because I think that's a little bit the make or break. If you have support of the top management, you have a kind of, let's say, a chance. If they just see it as another initiative that, as you mentioned already, lasts 2 or 3 years, and then there comes another, we say always a little small piggy that runs through the halls, and then it's a little bit of a challenge. What's your experience on this?
Okay, it's mixed. It was not a fight because when I was mandated for this, it was by the CEO directly.
Okay,
the CEO was my sponsor. And always remained so. So when I started, a bit after I started, I had to facilitate a customer board that was sponsored by the number 2 of the company.
Okay.
And this board continues to exist right now.
Nice.
So the support was okay, at least intellectually. But when it came about doing concrete things, it was a little bit different.
Yeah.
I recall 2 things that were a bit more difficult to obtain, but eventually happened at Michelin. The first one is make sure we talk about customers when it is important. My boss used to sit in the executive committee. Every time she came back, she would make a quick report of what was sold when it was not confidential. Yeah. And at the end, she would ask if we had questions. And I always had the same one. What did you say about the customer? And she would always tell me, Benoit, stop now, don't pull my leg. You know, we have no time to talk about the customer in the executive committee. Yeah. Oh, why so? Because we speak about important matters. Okay, so this means customer is not an important matter. Yeah. You cannot say that, blah, blah, blah. You know that. Yeah. And eventually, after a couple of months of this, the COO sent a note to everyone saying, starting now, for every executive committee, we will have 30 minutes discussion around the customer that will be facilitated by Benoit. And it's not going to be an option. Everyone will have to do it. Nice. We have to do it as we have done for safety, because it is something of the highest importance.
Oh, that's great.
And this continues now to this time. And the second thing I've done, we started a problem resolution process that we eventually called the customer rooms. And the main point was to get around the table everyone that was part of the problem or part of the solution with the mandate to fix the problem for the customer. And this was not working like the usual project team. It was very much starting from customer verbatim. And the point was not just to fix the problem, but to present the problem to the customer and get his feedback.
Okay.
So it's very, customer-oriented process.
Yeah.
And the top escalation body was supposed to be the executive committee, but the executive committee would never, ever get into this kind of process. So for 2 years, I had a fight until we found the right way to do it with the top shots. And starting this point, it started working quite well. And the CEO would attend this every time, without exception.
Very nice.
Showing just with his feet that, okay, I'm getting involved. I'm not going to fix the problem myself because it's technical. However, I just show with my behavior that I consider it of the highest importance. So at the end of the day, people will just comply with the recommendation and big problems will get fixed.
Understood. That's very nice. Because this is also what I see the misalignment in, especially with younger peoples that are start to work in customer experience departments. Most of the times they focus a lot on the data and the software to gather the data and the dashboards to present it. But I always say and always said, listen, most important is the decision-making process, especially in customer experience management, who to integrate when, to convince with what, and also not to because everyone is super busy. So you're coming very late, let's say, that started like 10, 15 years ago. So we have a lot of meetings about agile, or we have a lot about AI or IT anyway. So there are a lot of meetings happening already. So when you come with an additional kind of meeting process, you really have to prove your benefit and also make it as lean or as, let's say, on the spot as possible. Otherwise, customer experience management suffers big time. That's my experience.
I like very much this question, especially today as AI is everywhere and it's so much of the fashion.
Exactly.
AI is not going to fix problems. It's a mean. It's a facilitator. It's an enabler, but it's not the solution. And when it comes to customer experience, you need to inspire people. I've never seen anyone getting inspired by a dashboard, even if a very nice one. So when I've been to the executive committee, it was not to report back about what is NPS and what's the reason why we are low or whatever. It was to tell stories. I would tell stories with verbatims. I will tell stories with videos from the customer, and possibly sometimes I would even bring a customer with me so that the customer will tell his story directly without rehearsal, straight from his mind. So the impact was much more. At the end of the day, you are very right. The feeling we have is that having the right data sets and the right dashboard will lead to the right decisions. But the problem is this last missing point. So I rather had no data on the right decisions and a lot of data on no time to decide.
Because also when you look at the blogs, let's say from the IT vendors, or when you take a look into the customer experience books that are published, it's a lot about NPS or the different KPIs, but you see little bit nothing how to design the decision-making process. And also in my book, everybody, also the publisher was very, let's say, confused because I called my first chapter customer-centric decision-making. And they said, why don't you do it just customer value or just the customer data? And I said, because it's not about the customer value or the data or the insights or however you want to call it. It's about the decision-making and how you integrate data or insights into the decision-making process. Because at the end, what I also experience as a consultant, and I think you also experience in your role, you can have a lot of data that ends in the garbage, and then the meeting is over and you had a lot of work, but actually nothing had changed.
You're very right. I'll tell you a story. When I started in the position, one usual suspect of bad customer experience in the group was the invoicing process. Invoicing would be sometimes mistaken. And very often a bit complex and hard to translate into action. So from the customer point of view, it was a mess. And it was known. And somehow it was even accepted as, okay, that's it, we get used to it. And the reports and the percentage of verbatim about invoicing and all those things were widely reported. So nothing changed.
Yeah.
Also, the information was there and the data was there.
Yeah.
What I've done is a bit different. I've been, actually, it was in Switzerland, so not very far from you.
Okay, that sounds
I've been
close.
to Switzerland. I visited 10, 12 customers.
Mm-hmm.
And I just listened to what they had to say.
Okay.
I didn't prompt anything.
Mm-hmm.
The experience with invoicing was just desperate.
Yeah.
Some people were actually crying when they got the invoice from us.
Yeah.
And I wrote a report using mostly verbatims. I took as many exact verbatims as possible.
Yeah.
And then I sent the report to everyone.
Okay.
And a few weeks later, someone came to me and told me, your report had the effect of a bomb.
Okay.
And some people from the executive committee say, this is not us, this cannot last, it's not part of our culture, it has to be fixed. Yeah. So the point is not whether or not we have the data, mm-hmm. or whether or not we have the right dashboards. Mm-hmm. The point is, how do we prompt the right decision-making process in order for things to happen? Mm-hmm. And that's the point. Yeah. How to influence decision-making so things actually happen for the customer.
Yeah. And that's another question for you, or also something where I don't have an answer myself, but what I experience in the organizations is most of the times when they start with customer experience management, they call it here marketing, but actually it's the communication department. So especially in Switzerland, we do not have marketing in companies. It's communication. And then you are, let's say, dotted line to the CEO. I mean, this most of the companies do, right? But more or less you sit in the communication department, or because it has something to do with the customer, so communication has something to do with the customer. So from your experience, I see that this is failing by default or by definition. But what would be your recommendation in the organization? Where do you put customer experience management organizational-wise?
I'm pretty sure my response will come to a surprise to you. Okay. It's interesting you speak about communication, because when it comes about experience, what's the point? Mm-hmm. Do we want to focus on facts, mm-hmm. or do we want to run a beauty contest? Mm-hmm. If you want to run a beauty contest and explain to everyone that your customer experience is fantastic, just do it. But it's not going to change anything in facts. Yeah. If you want things to happen, actually, when I started my position, I've been put into marketing and sales central department. Mm-hmm. But when you look at what Michelin actually is, the customer-facing employees, which means customer service and sales people, are just 5-6% of the total headcount. Yeah. So I had a possibility of action just on a small part of the company, and I was not likely to change things deeply. Mm-hmm. Eventually, I've been transferred to quality. Mm-hmm. And quality is of interest because it's regarding 100% of the processes. Mm-hmm. It's considered neutral. Mm-hmm. But more, for me, quality had strong process attitudes about how to make in place a guarantee. Mm-hmm. And quality had a network, mostly relying on industry, but this network was expanding into services as well. Mm-hmm. So I had two things. I had robust processes at my hand, and I had the possibility to demultiplicate actions throughout the company. Mm-hmm. And I've seen that in a couple of other companies, not many. Essilor was like this. Mm-hmm. Schneider Electric also was like this. Mm-hmm. And most of the time when it was embedded into quality, considering quality of product and quality of service at the same time, you had the possibility to actually influence things quite well. Mm-hmm. And you had also a great legitimacy to interact with non-sales people. Mm.
Because like you said, people underestimate the good thing of quality departments, or let's say operational excellence. I mean, if you are a service company, you focus more on processes than on let's say the product quality. But what you said is a very important thing. People underestimate those departments have already processes. Because if you put customer experience into communication or sales, you have to build up all this network, all these, let's say, influence. And like you said, most of the companies, it's only, let's say, 10% of the all stuff. You have to all build and set up those processes or promoters within those different other departments. And this is also a struggle by itself. It's nothing you have within 1 year. So actually the customer experience department is then more working internally to build, let's say, a network to get influence in order to bring in the insights and to change based on the given processes that are already existing. And I think that's a very great setup that you had in Michelin, and also that people understood, hey, that's the best way or the best place for you guys to be.
You said an important word. You spoke about influence. Yeah. And I think the key competency for a CXO is about impact and influence. Yeah. In my case, the setting was pretty nice because I came from sales. Yeah. I used to be a commercial director, which, by the way, is not so common for CXOs. Yeah. I think only 5% of us are coming from this kind of functions. Yeah. So being a former commercial director, I was very legitimate with my former colleagues, speaking about the customer, because I used to face customer all the time. Yeah. And being as part of quality, I benefited from all the processes and technologies that I didn't have before. Yeah. So I could have both things. I could have it both ways, which to me allows me to have, I think, a significant influence. The point is not for customer experience manager to do things that are told him to be done, but to influence the decision-making process of the company in order for things to happen. I was expected to inspire the executive committee, not the opposite. And that's very interesting.
Yeah. And also, I think what you said is about the career path or the background. Also, my experience is if you have, let's say, a track record within the organization, especially in sales or in a customer-facing position, can also be in service. It depends always on the industry. Where do you have more customer interaction? But I think what you said, to be legit and to be respected in the organization, people underestimate, because most of the times what they do here in Switzerland, at least I see it when I look at their LinkedIn profiles, they hire profiles 30 years, 35 years, having worked 2 or 3 years in customer experience management somewhere, have done a master. But what they miss, and that's also the problem they have sooner than later, is that they cannot talk the business. And this is not helping to influence and inspire other people, because you can easily, when you listen to them, say, yeah, that's a great idea, but actually you don't know what it means on the numbers, or we see the customers totally different. So you will have a huge challenge to convince people having that background.
One thing I have to say also is I've been lucky also to be at Michelin, because the company has a long history of, casting people that are not obvious for a task. So at Michelin, you can move from sales to industry. Yeah. It happens. Yeah. Great. So I've seen former commercial directors becoming plant managers. I've seen people from research and development becoming commercial directors. Things like this. It's not very frequent, but it happens quite commonly. Yeah. So having people with different backgrounds at some point is also helping the company to have a, more unified culture. Yeah. Oh. It's not very usual.
No. But also I have the same experience at Bosch or also at Siemens. Like you said, they try, because also the challenge there is every department now gets more and more specialized. So it's compared to 50 years ago, it's much more difficult to swap people or change people, giving also the speed of knowledge you have to obtain in your own home turf, let's say.
Yes.
But I see this with the big industrial companies. They really try to shift people from one department to another one. And also for the young one, they have to go through 3-1. So they have to be in product management. They have to be in sales. I mean, later they can pick and choose more or less what they want to do. But in as many industrial companies I know, when you start there, let's say in the age of 25, 30, you have to go through different roles in different departments, because that's what you need to have a really broad understanding how the business is run.
Correct.
Great.
Very correct.
And now we spoke a lot about customer experience in general. So what I'm a little bit like to focus today, because it's every topic is huge and the time runs like hell. So it's always like you have to have a little bit of focus. I would like, because also that's where we met about the topic of voice of the customer. So the thing about this process, gathering data from the customer, bringing it in the organization, driving the change. So I would like to start with you, because what I experience a little bit, or where I struggle a little bit, is like you said, this NPS kind of thing. How do you make people, first of all, in this role understand the data? Because that's what I see also in my education. People are not so interested, no matter I do marketing courses, I do courses in business model generation, I do courses in sales. So from my side, at least in Switzerland, I claim that I have a broad overview what people like to learn and what people do not like to learn. And data management or understanding, especially customer data, is not so much, or let's say, on the radar as it should be. So how do you tackle this to start?
Okay, data is, you've got different levels of data.
Yeah.
First of all, you've got the basic data, the customer data and the operational data that you need to manage properly. Yeah. Having customer data in an industrial company, having them correct and clean is, don't try to fix it. It's always going to be messy. Yeah. I don't think there is one company that has a right set of data. Yeah. So you learn to work with data that you know are not perfect. Yeah. But perfect is too late. So you have to start at some point.
But sorry to interrupt, Benoit, but that's the first thing, because when I teach, people always look at me and say, yeah, but what is if the customer doesn't pay so much attention when he fills in the survey? What if he lies to us? So the people focus so much on this, let's say, the data is not valid or the data is not really great, and have so much fear then to accept it as a decision point, where I say, look, the good thing about is those flaws on the data, they exist, but they also exist next year. That means you have maybe, let's say, a little bit of bad data, but the good news about it, it's bad in every year, so there is not a big change, so it's consistent over time.
Yeah, I would say even more. Yeah. Expecting data to be perfect because before you start anything is the way to avoid action. Yeah. So that's the point. Then you have to interconnect the data that are, having sense to be together. Yeah. So having the right supply chain data with the right customer, for instance, is not so easy because you've got all the data into different systems. Yeah. So that's the basis of your stuff. Then you have the result of what you do. So the data that are basically the numbers into your dashboards. My job was to make sure those data were correct, but not too much highlighted. So I did a very, tough job trying to promote NPS and what is around NPS. And then they promoting the indicator because I didn't want to higher focus on NPS and rather higher focus on verbatim, unstructured data and things like this to give a meaning to whatever number we had. But the number was robust enough to be part of the annual reporting of the company, even when it was going down, which is to me kind of a success.
Yeah, definitely.
And then you have to manage a growing number of non-structurized data. And then you have to take the best use out of it, but still explaining people that those data also are not perfect because you are not going to have a perfect dashboard attributing the right verbatim to the right box, even if it's done by human persons. You take two persons and they will not sort things exactly the same way. Because
that would be, sorry to interrupt you again, that would be another question from my point of view. Because let's say the beauty of NPS is just a number. So you have a number, you can measure the different departments or the different transaction. I mean, it depends if you do this overall NPS measurement, let's say once a year, how you like to measure how the people like or love the company, or you do a transactional, let's say the example you gave for the invoicing. After the invoicing, you ask them how great was the invoicing process. So you can distinguish these two kind of NPS measurements. But at the end of the day, it's very beautiful. So because there's a number, so when it comes to verbatims, how do you then kind of align, or you said, okay, people are doing it differently, but when you present it, let's say you have an NPS that's kind of okayish, let's say you have a 30 or a 35, but still people are saying on a verbatim, guys, this sucks. So it's a contradicting information. You have on the one side, you can have an NPS that is not great, let's say, but still it's kind of okayish compared to the overall NPS of the company. But on the other hand, people are complaining, or some customers, or B2B also, you have this, what people don't understand, you have this high differentiation between A customers, which makes 80% of your revenue, and the C customers, which make 60%. So you can have quite some A customers, and it's a low number that are complaining, but you should listen much more to them than to the big group of people that makes, let's say, 20% out of the revenue of the others. So this is also a bit of a challenge, I think, in a B2B company, isn't it?
It is. You have to interpret the data and you have to give sense to it. Of course, eventually, you can misinterpret things. You've got overwhelming things about price, for instance, but if you look carefully about it, it has little or no impact on NPS because by definition, everyone finds things too expensive by definition. So you have to, okay, price might be an issue, but it's not really an issue. It's a normal process between a supplier and the customer. And then you've got low intensity signals that you have to be careful about that might stem from not so big companies, but would be signaling some things that could be very important in the future. Then you've got to make a distinction between your most important customers and your less important customer. So there are many ways to analyze things, but there are ways also to find out how noisy is a problem. So if you have a problem at some point in time, one of the complex issues we tackled in the customer room, the given problem, I don't get in depth because it's technical, was about 2/3 of the verbatim of a region. Now it's about 5%. So you can consider the problem as being solved because of the intensity of the noise around this. So what we measure is not so much what kind of problem we have or NPS versus categories or things like this, but how does it move? What are the categories we have, and how do they move from one year to the next?
I see. So it's also not the NPS kind of if it's growing, it's the number of verbatims or the intensity of verbatims. Also, I mean, you can also read like this is not so great or it really sucks. I mean, also the verbatims can change. I mean, also the expressions within the verbatims. And just very operational. How do you deal with verbatims? Because most of my clients, they say, I don't want to measure verbatims. I focus on the NPS. And then I say, at least if someone has a score lower than 7, ask them why. At least you have from the distractor, this is the scale of NPS is working distractor, passive, and promoters. So distractors is everyone from 0 to 6. So at least get the verbatims of this population. But how do you do it? Did you do it for all groups or did you just focus on the detractors?
Actually, I made a mistake when I started this. I focused on the detractors. And I make it mandatory to call all detractors back within 2 days.
Oh, wow.
Roughly. Okay. So rather quickly. Actually, it was to be defined by country, but average was about 2 days. And it was done about 95% of the time. Fair enough. But after giving a second thought to it, I thought, well, it's a mistake not to call back the others, especially the promoters, because they took the time to write a love letter to you. So they have a message, and not making this important, not calling them back to thank them and maybe ask what we could do better is probably a mistake because promoters have more value for the companies than detractors. So at the end of the day, we called back those that have a lesser value for the company in a way. It was okay to fix the problems for those guys, but it was a mistake not to call back the promoters. I would have done things differently today. Okay.
Because what I also see, especially in B2B, you have almost 80% that are within the passives. So like you said, you focus on a very small group actually of customers when you just focus on detractors and promoters. And also I'm trying to explain to people that the problem I see a little bit with NPS, that these passives that especially in B2B areas can be really, really huge percentage-wise. You kind of take them for granted a little bit. That's what I encounter over the last years, that when I discuss this, everybody says, yeah, these are the passives and they are, let's say, nice to have, what to do about it. And that's a little bit where I'm trying to focus in the last, or let's say that is my learning over the last years, that I said, okay, actually that the promoters, detractors, I don't care so much. For me, it's the passives, because listen, this is a 70-80% of your customer base.
Yeah, if you look at a political situation, most candidates will look into those that don't know for which to vote. Those that know already, it's too late. Yeah. So focusing on the uncertains is making sense. So maybe you're very right. It's not 80% for at Michelin, but it's a very significant bench, maybe 40 or 50%. Okay. You're very right. So calling back those passives and promoters, that was not made mandatory initially for me, is making sense.
Yeah, especially in Switzerland, because also the NPS has a cultural problem. So if you go to US, you have, or Asia, in US you have very high scores. If you go to Asia, the scores goes quite low, although everything is quite well. Because I introduced it in Bosch, I was responsible for the NPS measurement worldwide. And then we had different numbers in different regions. And people were, the first time they looked at it, was saying, yeah, we should focus on US because look, we already have a great footstep. In Asia, understanding that China is one of the biggest markets now for Bosch, they were like, yeah, Asia, maybe not so great. We should focus more on the other side. No. This has a cultural impact. And especially in Switzerland, people do not, if someone in Switzerland criticizes, then he's really kind of pissed. So in Switzerland, we have this thing that the people are tending towards passives. So they neither promote you so much, nor they criticize you so much. So this is something that's very special in Switzerland. So if you apply NPS in Switzerland, you have to be aware that you have quite a higher number of passives than you have in other markets.
Yeah, I recall a very specific case. I used to be a commercial director in Japan. Japan tend to be quite harsh when ratings. Okay. And I recall we had the feedback from Honda, and the score was 5 out of 10. And the comment was, everything is fine.
Oh, that's tough. Okay. I thought that's only the Germans, but so Germans and Japanese, they have something in common, I see.
Yeah. Tough. Great. Yeah.
And going a little bit more into the operations about the data management. So you need some software to gather this feedback, especially given that Michelin is worldwide or internationally company. So you have to kind of measure or get the data somewhere to analyze it in an efficient way. My question would be, how do you integrate this with, you said it already, the commercial data in the organization or CRM data? How did you tackle this thing about, let's say, data alignment?
Okay, these at some point in time, the CXO has to work very much close, hand in hand with the chief data officer of the company. And at some point, this guy was my best friend. Okay. And I'm not sure we are perfect. We've done for the customer and operational data that what everyone has done with Salesforce.com and things like this. So the CRM was doing things like this. When it comes to unstructured data, how to tap into this huge quantity of things that are not so easy to sort out, we considered many options outside. And then we found out that we don't want to have a black box. Okay. We want to know how things are getting monitored, and we want to be able to go in depth and understand the qualification. So we developed our own algorithm using our teams in a data management center. And eventually we developed our own way also to make all the data, the results, not the data itself, available for everyone. So we had an analysis of the feedbacks without the names, non-nominative, made available to 100% of the company in totality. So it's not just the data management, it's also how you make it available to everyone that cares about it to make sure they can use it. I think the key points with data management is not so much do we have the right data sets or do we have the right analysis, but do we make the data we have available to others and not feel so protective about the data that we cannot share because we feel like it's confidential or things like this. So data sharing to me is more important, the most important part of the process.
The exercise. But this means also, speaking technology, it's like you design something yourself, because all these Salesforce, Microsoft, SAPs in the world, from my point of view, they're very limited, especially if you go in the direction of verbatims. And also what people underestimate, you gather maybe feedback twice a year, or you gather feedback over the years. So after 5 years, you have a CRM system. This is full of verbatims. If you're not careful enough, also you have to think about when do I erase it or delete it, because otherwise you just have, I call it a data cemetery. And this is also then confusing for people if they look at it.
A little bit less in B2B. We have a bit less clients than B2C.
Okay.
So that the quantity of data was not the biggest issue.
Okay.
But the point is, focusing on aggregated information is also a bias, because it's also a way to avoid facing the reality of the data. So having the analysis is good because you can go quickly to the main points. But it should not stop you from reading actual verbatims or listening to actual customer. And the big risk with data is to fall in love with the dashboard, as we said already.
Yeah. Understood. And another question, when it comes to data analysis, we spoke a lot about verbatims, and just to give you an answer myself, I love them very much. Also, they are much more convincing. But still, what I do is I do regression analysis on quantitative data. Do you do this as well? Did you also, let's say, did a yearly measurement, had a sample of participants to understand from a strategic point of view what are the value drivers for the company, what are the value driver for CX management? Because the verbatims, they tell you, let's say, where the problems are, but it doesn't tell you how the value for the customer is perceived, or what are the value drivers. For example, service is, let's say, half important than the product, or as important as the product. I mean, you also need a bit an understanding how important those different offering dimensions that you have are for the customer, and might change over time. I mean, for sure, service gets more and more important compared to the product over the last years. Did you measure something like this also on a quantitative base?
We measure it, and we measure it also in the evolution from one year to the next. Yes. We should also not misunderstand the quantity of verbatim on a category and the intensity for the customer. So we said about pricing that many would speak about price, but doesn't mean that price has to be changed in any way. And at some point in time also, when we want to make a decision about what's the next priority for next year, because of course, when you have 200 problems, you're not going to fix them all in 6 months. So you need to set up priorities. Analyzing data is a way to set a priority. But for me, the best way is to have a customer advisory board that you can gather with different voices. And then you just look at everything and you vote with the customers which problems have to be tackled first. And then you say, okay, let's take those 5 problems. We'll work on them this year, and we will report back. Okay. Once you do even if it's not the most priority, the simple fact that you've done it together with the customer is the very virtuous process. You're sure you're not making a big mistake. But I was surprised. Also, I was in sales before. I was surprised how much we have a bias. We tend to assume what is important for the customer, thinking from the customer point of view. But then when you cross-check with the customer, you find out that it's not exactly the case. It's not what you think. And this bias, I've been surprised so many times and ashamed of myself sometimes, because also I've been 15, 20 years in sales. I still made mistakes about assuming things from the customer point of view, because you are not fully familiar with what they do, why, in which order, on the purpose of every action. So you always underestimate things.
It's not only because, as you know, I'm the head of a sales department now at the University of Applied Science in Zurich. The thing is also the following: as a salesperson, actually, you're not so much trained in gathering data and listening. You're much more about convincing and talking. So also you have to give credit, especially now, I mean, with the new solution selling approach or insight approach, it's changing at the moment. But this is something the last 5 or let's say 10 years. But everyone that works in sales, like let's say the last 20, 30 20 years, it was not trained to gather data. And this is always shocking for my students when I tell them, listen, guys, selling is about data gathering. And they start also co-creation initiatives now in sales with their customers when it comes to IoT or really innovative business model. And we train them on this. And you can really say how eye-opening is because, like you said, 90%, let's say, be honest, 95% of them think I'm super customer centric. I know everything. Why should I do a co-creation workshop with my customers? Because I meet them quite regularly.
Yes, I love this. I love this point that you're making. Actually, you're very right. I used to be trained also at Michelin School of Sales, which is a very good one. And the key point was how to present a product and how to respond to objections. So how to win an argument, basically. So I was not trained to listen. I was trained to observe. I was trained to listen, but to listen in order to respond, mostly, and to win the point. And salespeople will tell me that, look, Benoit, what the hell are you coming with your voice of customer initiative? I am the voice of customer. I'm with the customer every day. I know them. And then my response, because I'm in sales, I had the right to make this response. And that's an important point. I told them, look, you see your wife every day. Are you sure you know everything she thinks? Are you sure you're aware of their preferences? I doubt it. Ask her.
And I like this example because that's actually what I do in all my classes. I always tell them, listen, think about your wife or think about your partner. And it goes into both directions. So you see the women that kind of get a shock if you think about this, and you see the man that get a shock. This example really helps a lot to make clear you can live with someone on a daily basis and still do not know everything this people has in his heart and his mind. Now I like this because I use it as well, because this really helps to open eyes or to have a chance to get people on board. I like this very much. One of the last questions I would like to tackle with you then, because when I'm also a little bit older, so when I started, it was all about brand management. So I had the chance also to work in Berlin at the chair of one of the most, let's say, famous researcher on brand management. So that's a little bit my kind of background. And in brand management, they were saying like finding the right positioning, having the right also experience. So this is where I was coming from. And then now, let's say 15, 20 years later, this customer experience emerged. Or how do you see the combination of brand management, company positioning, and customer experience management? Has this something to do, or is this separated? Is this an integrated thing? Because as you said, in Michelin, you were in the quality management, so you're quite far away from brand management, I assume. But still, I mean, at the end, it's not only, again, fixing things, it's also like understanding what should we position ourselves, what topics should we in our communication address. How is this integration into, let's say, branding communication from your point of view?
Okay. I first have to confess that I have absolutely zero experience in marketing whatsoever. Okay. I've been a pure sales guy all my life. Anyway, I try to respond to this. I think at the end of the day, when you want to be consistent with the brand, you need to have the attitudes and behaviors of your sales staff to be in line, in sync with the brand principle, with the brand values. So once you've identified the brand values, you need to translate things into behaviors. And one of the, the very important point of the voice of customer is to work on what we call how to maintain a culture of customer centricity, how to make sure that these last in time. And this goes with a process that is concentrating on attitudes and behaviors. And also you cannot dictate attitudes all the time. You can at least inspire it. And one of the latest things I've done in my time at Michelin was to organize trainings about exactly this, attitudes and behaviors consistent with the brand promise.
Okay, I see. Because this is also what I think is also one thing is, like you said, is verbatims and making decisions on what to fix. But on the other hand, also assure customer experience-wise that we define this orchestrating that, let's say, not everyone, but we work proactively that everyone gets in the direction of the same attitude and the same behavior kind of setup and not just focusing on fixing processes and fixing stuff that is not working. So for me, it's also these two kind of dimensions that are very important for a customer experience management to be successful.
It looks a little bit foggy when you speak about this like this, but from my experience and made in a very concrete manner, it made sense even for everyone in the sales staff. And actually, the reason why we do this is to get into a situation where having a visit from, let's say, Michelin would be something that can be that will happen in an expected manner. We all know companies that are so customer-centric that when you call them, you know what is going to happen and how it's going to happen. You know they're going to listen to you. You know they are going to answer quickly. And you know they are going to fix your problem without asking for any proof. Right? And once you've done this, you've got what I would call like a little music that looks like Michelin. And that makes everyone at Michelin look like each other in a certain way with some variations. When you reach this, you've reached not just a customer-centric culture within the company that is bringing fruits, but you also reach an identity toward your customers and your stakeholders that is very powerful.
I fully agree. And looking at the time, so there are some of our listeners that are very interested in customer experience management. So my final question is always, what are the one or two things you would like to give based on your experience as a recommendation or the summary where you think, looking back so far in your, let's say, very interesting or challenging work experience, what are the two recommendations you would give someone that is a little bit younger and maybe at the starting point of his or her career? What are the one or two things you would have them keep in mind?
All right. The first thing is CXO is a job that is still in the beginning. So it's been reinventing itself from time to time. There are two things to me that are key to remember. The first one is you are not here to collect numbers and data crunching. You are here to give the most honest picture of the reality. So for this, you need to keep connecting with this reality. You are not a good CXO if you are not visiting customers on a frequent basis and make report about this. Go to facts. Be close to the facts. And then it will also give you stories to tell. And you need to be able to tell stories. And the second thing I would like to insist is it's not like intermediate corporate positions that you have to execute things. You are here to make things being executed, including by the top management. So your job is about influencing the company in order to have an impact that is seen by the customer. And the indicator that you've done a good job is not a highest NPS. The indicators that you have done a good job is that customers will tell you directly that it is easy to work with you, that it is nice to work with you, that your company is the one that they would recommend. Nice. And that is the end point of all this. And this will take time. It's not going to happen right away. It will take 2, 3, 4 years to be felt by the customer.
I like especially the second one because many people get confused by CX. They think they have to do projects and they have to do Lighthouse. And that's like you said, you have to orchestrate in the back and not doing initiatives and starting to get your own budget on changing stuff within the organization. But this is a huge misunderstanding I see in many companies and many customer experience managers, like you said, after 3 years, they fail because there's a new piggy and the budget gets less. And then you struggle with a smaller budget to have some impact because you have set up or you have a wrong understanding of your role. It's you don't need budget in CX. What you need is influencing and convincing people.
Exactly.
Benoit, that was a huge and great pleasure having you. And like always, very exciting to talk about CX and your experience that is really solid. And from a sales perspective, really like I always call it kind of a street proven kind of track. Wish you all the best. Was a great time and looking forward to talk to you again soon.
Thank you very much, Jörg. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Eine Produktion von Customers X und Fluid Minds im Auftrag des Center for Sales und Retail der Hochschule für Wirtschaft Zürich.